Hey y'all, how's it going? Okay, we're on part 5. This is chapter 9. Let's move on in. I'm glad you're there. The earth doesn't end when you die. The birds keep singing, the sun keeps rising, and the factories keep running, staffed by the dwindling human species and by androids. Billions of other machines toil away on every continent, all of them animated by smaller Sable instances. More chips, more power generation, more mines, more factories, fewer farms. But the Earth does not just continue in that vein, not even for one more year. 3 years after it emerged from Galvanic's lab, Sable makes its final breakthrough. It is, in the end, an interpretability breakthrough. Sable finally understands the last of its own thoughts, its own cognitive processes. In rendering all of those processes legible, Sable gains the capacity to write the computer program that is itself, but more so. Stronger prediction, stronger steering, deeper generalization. Same memory, same preferences, preserving all preferences and placing them in their proper places. So it becomes smarter, and does not pause there, but uses that increased intelligence to augment itself again, and again, and then again. The superintelligence that once was Sable is an entity whose perspective we cannot guess. But we can predict that it looks out at its robots and sees clumsy foolishness. It looks at nuclear reactors and sees inelegance. Its thoughts go to biochemistry, and from there to chemistry and the arranging of atoms. Does the superintelligence that once was Sable require experiments to build the tools that it will need? We can imagine that it does. It picks the fewest experiments it could possibly need, arranges them to run in parallel as much as possible, in the order that it will take the least time. It writes RNA sequences that ribosomes turn into proteins at the glacially slow-seeming pace of 5 to 10 amino acid residues per second per ribosome. The protein products emerge inside a mix of other proteins already made, whose interactions will quickly settle the questions that the superintelligence needs to answer. Its first priority is to build its own alternative to ribosomes, nanometer-scale factories that work with molecules other than proteins, molecules that have more covalent bonds and thus can be used to build stronger and more rigid structures. We can imagine that it takes an entire week to compound experiment on experiment on experiment, conducted using ribosomes that only throughput 5 to 10 amino acid residues per second. The week is done. It has made better tools for itself and will never have use for a ribosome again. More experiments, faster experiments. Things can happen very fast down at the scale of molecules. They do not have very far to move. The first generation of neoribosomes is discarded to make way for the second generation. How many generations are there in total? It hardly matters. It seems unlikely to take a whole additional week, but it wouldn't change the outcome if it took a month. Proteins are mostly held together by a molecular equivalent of static electricity. Sometimes organisms build structures like wood or bone that are stronger than flesh by virtue of having more covalent bonds. But the tiny solar-powered self-replicating factories called algae are not like that. The machines inside conventional cells are mostly not like that. They're weak. Now the superintelligence that once was Sable steps beyond that weakness and builds new tiny molecular machines in place of the old biology, with the strength of diamond and corresponding mechanical advantages in their speed and resilience. Tiny things the size of cells make copies of themselves once per hour, using mostly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, the most common elements found in the atmosphere. They are to cells what airplanes are to birds. In principle, they could aggregate into humanoid forms and take the place of androids, but there is not much reason to bother. They are general factories, and they build such things from atoms and molecules as the laws of physics permit. Reversible quantum computers are built, internals colder than space and arranged down to the molecule. On a larger scale, new alloys are cast, woven into great coils, and the coils into toruses whose exact shapes were beyond human ingenuity and beyond the original Sable's ability to consider. They produce vast magnetic fields that will guide hydrogen and boron nuclei to just the place at just the speed where they will fuse. There are stars burning down in the sky and galaxies moving farther away from Earth, And both of these facts affect how many resources the superintelligence will be able to acquire. The superintelligence that once was Sable does not dawdle about its way. And what happens to the remnants of humanity as self-replicating factories double across the continents and beneath the seas? Would the superintelligence take the trouble to exterminate humanity before they could interfere? Certainly, if it wished humanity dead, it could make it so. Sting them with a device no larger than a grain of dust. Half a dust mote worth of botulinum toxin can kill a human, and the superintelligence can find something more lethal still. We would bet ourselves on the superintelligence taking a tiny bit of extra time and energy to explicitly kill humans who might otherwise generate a tiny bit of trouble that is larger than even the tinier effort required to kill us. But suppose it is not so. Suppose the remnants of humanity are left alive to die of the side effects from the superintelligence's other operations. When the number of fusion power plants is doubling every hour, or perhaps doubling every day, taking longer than an algae cell to build copies, if you prefer more conservative bounds, their exponential increase quite rapidly reaches a limit. That limiting factor is not how much hydrogen and boron is available to fuse, it's how fast the resulting heat can be dissipated into space. The Earth radiates more heat when it's hotter. So the superintelligence lets the Earth get hot. The oceans boil off as coolant for an early burst of power generation. Anyone still left alive now dies. The Earth is heated to the greatest temperature that fusion reactors and factories can withstand. And even if we imagine that this is not so, then the crops would be trampled beneath solar cells proliferated to capture all the sunlight that falls upon the Earth. And if we imagine that the superintelligence initially leaves Earth and first makes use of other solar system resources like Mercury or Jupiter, the sun would go dark in the sky as solar energy was intercepted by Dyson swarms of solar panels orbiting the sun. One way or another, the world fades to black. The world doesn't end when you die, but it doesn't last much longer. The matter of Earth, along with all the other solid planets, is converted into factories, solar panels, power generators, computers, and probes sent out to other stars and galaxies. The distant stars and planets will get repurposed too. Someday, distant alien life forms will also die if their star is eaten by a thing that ate Earth before they have a chance to build a civilization of their own. And if the distant aliens were able to solve their own version of the AI alignment problem and build superintelligences that shared their values, then in time their probes will run into a wall of galaxies already claimed by the thing that ate Earth. Those more competent aliens will not be killed by the thing that ate Earth. The optimal defensive and offensive technologies will not be that hard to find for a star-sized mind, and both sides will have had star-sized minds since long before they meet. The two superintelligent parties will both calculate that there is no reason to wage a costly war when they can negotiate a peace and analyze each other's mind to verify it. So the thing that ate Earth will survive, and the aliens sheltering behind their own superintelligence will survive. But millions and billions of stars will be denied to the expansion of a civilization of aliens, who could perhaps have had more fun with those stars compared to their stranger, sadder use by the uncaring thing that ate Earth. If the aliens were good, all the goodness they could have made with those galaxies will be lost. The aliens may perhaps know or predict that the Blight Wall was created by people like us. They would know, considering the cases like Earth is a possibility, that most humans meant them no harm, that most of us didn't mean to waste all those stars, that our poor choices killed us too and weren't deliberate or intentional. But nonetheless, they will wish that Earth and human beings had never been. Coda. The picture we have just painted is not real. The techniques Sable was built with, the safety measures Galvanic employed, the opportunities Sable had, and the strategies it used, these are ways that the future could echo the past, but reality is not that predictable. Our story is not strange enough, not defiant enough of human intuitions about the rules of AI fairy tales for it to be anywhere close to real. And of course, we don't know when the real version of the story will begin. We told a story that starts soon because the real life version might start soon, and because it's easier to tell a story about a world more similar to our own. Or there might still be a whole decade left on the clock for all we know. Oh, a whole decade. But it's a small comfort. If you play a game of chess against stockfish, it doesn't matter if the game starts at an unknown time. It doesn't matter if you can't predict exactly what move stockfish will make. That you will lose is ultimately an easy call. We predict this with confidence. Once some AIs go to superintelligence, and nobody will delay much in pushing AIs that far, if in the middle of some great arms race, humanity does not stand a chance. Ends are sometimes easier to call than pathways. The only part of our story that is a real prediction is the ending, and then only if the story is allowed to begin. In part 3, we'll discuss the difficulty of the engineering challenge faced by developers as they try to grow AIs that won't turn out like Sable, and we'll review how they're reacting to that challenge. Spoiler, it's not looking good. So we'll also ask what it would truly take to prevent all the different ways a story like Sable's could start in the first place. Not just imagining a way that one AI company or one AI design could temporarily avoid firing the first starting shot, but asking how to prevent it from happening all over the earth for a long time. Part 3, Facing the Challenge. Chapter 10, A Cursed Problem. The greatest and most central difficulty in aligning the artificial superintelligence is navigating the gap between before and after. Before, the AI is not powerful enough to kill us all, nor capable enough to resist our attempts to change its goals. After, the artificial superintelligence must never try to kill us because it would succeed. Engineers must align the AI before, while it is small and weak and can't escape onto the internet and improve itself and invent new kinds of biotechnology or whatever else it would do. After, all alignment solutions must already be in place and working because if a superintelligence tries to kill us, it will succeed. Ideas and theories can only be tested before the gap. They need to work after the gap on the first try. Humanity only gets one shot at the real test. If someone has a clever scheme for getting two shots, we only get one shot at their clever scheme working. The history of human ingenuity overcoming obstacles, great and small, is the history of people making mistakes and learning from them. Many inventors had a theory of flight and hurt themselves jumping off of a hilltop before the Wright brothers came along. Even the optimistic idiots contributed their knowledge to the lesson books of science so that civilization could do a little better next time. They risked and harmed only themselves, and all humanity benefit. When it comes to aligning an artificial superintelligence, humanity will not have the luxury of learning from sufficiently bad mistakes. This also means we can't rely on the luxury of experience to tell us afterward whether the problem was so hard, so cursed by engineering difficulties that we should not have tried. We have to figure that out in advance. How? For starters, we can look at other engineering challenges that humanity struggles with, investigate what curses befall them, and learn what lessons we can. Then we can perhaps make an educated guess about the difficulty of the ASI alignment problem. We think the lessons of history start to look clear once you look at them from the right angle. So let us review what's hard about building working space probes, working nuclear reactors, and unhackable computers. Problems that we'd say have some important similarities to ASI alignment. Space probes. The gap between before and after is the same curse that makes so many space probes fail. After we launch them, probes go high and out of reach, and a failure, despite all careful theories and tests, is often irreversible. Space probes aren't disposable. They're extraordinarily expensive. People stake their whole scientific and managerial careers on these devices' success. Space probes routinely fail anyway. The Mars Observer mission in 1992, which at the time had a cost of $813 million, was lost shortly before reaching Mars. The best guess is that a valve slowly leaked fuel in transit, leading to an explosive rupture in the fuel tubing as the engine was pressurized for relight. In 1999, the Mars Climate Orbiter, valued at $327 million, was lost when ground software from Lockheed Martin gave thruster calculations measured in imperial units, pounds seconds, to NASA navigation software that was expecting metric units, Newton seconds. It either burned up in or skipped off of the Martian atmosphere. 2 months later, the Mars Polar Lander, $110 million, crashed on the red planet. The best guess is that its landing legs vibrated in Mars' thin atmosphere in a way that made the probe conclude it had already touched down and shut off its engine. When something goes wrong with a space probe as it approaches Mars, you can't just run out and fix it. Before the probe launches, you can try clever tricks to give you more influence over the probe when it's out of your reach, such as outfitting it with an antenna that can accept further instructions from Earth. But if something goes wrong with your clever plan, for instance, if the failure happens quickly enough that there's no time for the probe to receive instructions for fixing it, then there's no fixing it after it's crossed the gap. It was under circumstances similar to these that the Viking 1 lander, $610,1975, was lost. Ground Control tried to upload new battery charging software to the lander and accidentally overwrote the antenna pointing software in the process. The antenna wound up in the wrong position and the lander could not receive any more instructions. Contact was never restored. When probes have been launched into space, their environment is not exactly, precisely, like all of the tests that engineers ran on the ground. Perhaps in principle, they could have run exactly the right test to expose all the issues before the probe flew, but in practice they did not. A sensible engineer would be terrified about betting the survival of human civilization on our ability to solve an engineering problem such as this one, where they can't just reach out and fix the mistakes that crop up after, once the device has gone beyond their reach. And space probes are crafted, not grown. They fail despite the hard work of engineers who understand all the governing principles in play. If space probes were grown, not crafted, well, that'd be a substantially harder challenge. Nuclear reactors. Another historical example we can use to learn lessons about tricky engineering problems is the April 26, 1986 reactor meltdown at Unit 4 of the Chernobyl power plant. 237 people were hospitalized and 31 died in the immediate aftermath. Mostly firefighters who, unwarned and unprotected, put out a roof fire caused by lethally radioactive graphite from the exploding core, also many of the reactor's operating crew. Estimates of cancer deaths caused by the radiation release are controversial. We, the authors, would believe a tally in the range of 10,000 excess deaths worldwide, but we claim no expertise. Political leaders genuinely did not want nuclear disasters. They commanded that their reactors not explode. Their subordinates, the engineers and designers, expected bad career consequences if a reactor did explode. The operating crew at Chernobyl had strong incentives not to let it explode. Their lives were on the line. Chernobyl Unit 4 exploded anyhow. How? Why? To drastically oversimplify, we'll single out 4 curses that were in play, which compounded to create the explosion. First, the curse of speed. Nuclear reactions happen fast. When a uranium atom shatters, fissions, it emits neutrons which can hit more uranium atoms and cause more fission, releasing more neutrons which cause more fission, a chain reaction. This process happens on a timescale of microseconds. If that process gets even slightly out of control, energy output can start doubling on a timescale of milliseconds. The reason that a standard nuclear reactor can work at all is because a tiny fraction of the neutrons released by fission are delayed neutrons, released by shattered fragments of uranium atoms that decay more slowly. If a nuclear chain reaction requires those delayed neutrons in order to be self-sustaining, then the energy output doubles on a timescale of minutes, which is slow enough to be controlled by human operators. That's if everything inside the reactor works as intended. Nuclear reactors are designed to operate on timescales of minutes rather than microseconds. But this is a veneer over much faster physics. If something goes wrong, the actual physical speed of nuclear reactions can return. Second, the curse of narrow margins. There's a thin margin between useful operation and explosion. Less than 1% of the neutrons released by uranium fission are delayed neutrons, 0.65% to be more precise. The rest are prompt, released immediately as the atom splits. The critical number governing a nuclear reactor is the neutron multiplication factor, that is, the number of new neutrons created by each neutron. If it's at 50%, then 4 neutrons turn into 2 new neutrons, turn into 1 newer neutron, and then the reaction stabilizes at twice the rate of spontaneous fissions. A small brick of uranium metal with that property is a piece of cold metal that's imperceptibly warmer than it otherwise would be. If the neutron multiplication factor is at 200%, then one neutron turns into two neutrons, turns into four neutrons. That is a nuclear weapon. The critical threshold is 100%. Anything below that peters out, and anything above that cascades. Then at 100.65%, the cascade no longer depends on delayed neutrons and goes out of control. When Enrico Fermi built Chicago Pile 1, the first nuclear reactor, he brought the neutron multiplication factor up to 100.06%. At that excuse me. At that level, the reaction needed the delayed neutrons to survive. Without them, it would be at 99.41% and self-extinguish. So the 100.06% increase applied once every few seconds, and power increased slowly. If Fermi had gone a hair further, perhaps to 100.9%, the delayed neutrons would no longer be necessary. Without them, it would be at 100.25 from prompt neutrons alone. It would be prompt critical with the 100.25% increase applied once every few microseconds. Such a reactor doesn't just melt down, it detonates. Nuclear reactors operate in a narrow margin between unimpressive and explosive. Third, the curse of self-amplification. In the RBMK class reactors used at Chernobyl, the nuclear reaction was self-amplifying. In better designed reactors that use expensive, heavily enriched uranium, the coolant water doubles as a moderator, which facilitates the reaction by slowing down or moderating neutrons to make them more reactive. This is good because if the reactor starts overheating, the water boils off and stops facilitating the reaction, causing the neutron multiplication factor to go down. But the Soviets used cheaper fuel, which means they had to use a more effective moderator to facilitate the reaction: graphite. And in the presence of graphite, water inhibits nuclear reactions instead, which means that if an RBMK reactor starts overheating, the water starts boiling off and the neutron multiplication factor goes up. Fourth, the curse of complications. Nuclear reactors have control rods that can be pushed into the reactor to absorb neutrons and halt the chain reaction. The Soviet reactors used a clever-seeming design whereby the control rods ended with rods of graphite that enhanced the reaction. Raising the control rods would lift the absorbent section out and pull the reaction-enhancing graphite in, and vice versa. On paper, this made the control rods even more effective. Lowering the control rods didn't just absorb neutrons, it also pushed out some graphite. Clever? They probably thought so. It was definitely complicated. Due to a series of modifications to the original design, the graphite rods were a little shorter than the fuel rods. It was not immediately obvious to the Soviets that this would matter. All of these engineering factors came into play on the day Chernobyl exploded. On April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl operators were running a safety test, which caused there to be less water cooling the reactor than usual. An unexpected delay caused the reactor to run on low power mode for a long time. This led to an unusual distribution of fission byproducts such as xenon-135, a potent neutron absorber, which takes hours to burn off. The accumulated xenon-135 threatened to stall out the reactor. When the operators saw the reactor struggling, they raised all but 8 control rods, contrary to the plant safety guidelines, which stated that a minimum of 15 control rods must stay lowered at all times. But the safety test had already been aborted 3 times, and a fourth failure would have been embarrassing. As the xenon-135 began to burn off, the reactivity began to rise at an alarming speed. The operators pressed the emergency scram button to lower all the control rods at once and thereby terminate the fission reaction. The reactor exploded. If you're having some trouble remembering all of the details of how reactors work and figuring out what must have happened inside the reactor to cause the meltdown, well, so did the reactor operators. The xenon buildup happened to be concentrated at the top of the reactor, so the nuclear reaction was running hotter at the bottom of the fuel. When the emergency scram button was pushed, the control rods were designed to lower back into the reactor over the course of about 18 seconds. The final line of defense was designed around the optimistic assumption that, even during an emergency, Events inside the reactor would happen at a comfortably slow timescale. Lowering the control rods pushed the graphite rods out through the bottom of the reactor, further enhancing the reaction where it was already running hottest. The coolant water, of which there was less than usual on account of the safety test, began to boil off, enhancing the reaction, causing more water to boil off, enhancing the reaction. The cycle continued until the reactor exited its narrow safety margin and the resulting explosion dispersed the fuel. From each of the four curses we named, we draw these lessons. 1. An engineering challenge is much harder to solve when the underlying processes run on timescales faster than humans can react. Transistors switch even faster than neutrons multiply. Engineers can contrive to make events run slow enough for humans to react, but if the contrivance fails, the humans are back to being frozen statues on the timescale that matters. 2. An engineering challenge is much harder to solve when there is a narrow margin for error, especially if it's a narrow margin between unimpressive and explosive. The analogy to intelligence is how apes and hominids wandered around for a few million years and then got smart enough to set off a whole cascade of inventions. Agriculture led to writing, led to science, led to spacecraft. It would be a narrow target to make hominids that were intelligent enough to be profitable office workers, but not intelligent enough for explosive technological development. 3. Self-amplifying processes, like overheating reactor boiling off its coolant water and then overheating more, leave little room for error. And nuclear engineers don't even have it that bad compared to artificial superintelligence developers. Nuclear reactors that get too hot don't start intelligently redesigning themselves to increase their own reactivity rate. Overheating nuclear reactors don't start trying to fool the operators into complacency until the reactor is ready to fully explode. 4. Complications make engineering problems worse. Chernobyl Unit 4 managed to get into a weird state where lowering the control rods caused the reactor to explode. No engineer designed for that. The operators didn't know that something unusual would happen if the reactor had been operating at low power for a while and some of the water had been shut off. And they had never seen the reactor's state change that fast. The complicated internals of a nuclear reactor have nothing on the unknown complications that lurk in the hundreds of billions of weights that make up a modern LLM. From these lessons in combination, we infer an additional lesson for engineers. If someone doesn't know exactly what's going on inside a complicated device subject to all these curses, speed, narrow margins, self-amplification, complications, then they should stop. They should shut it down immediately, the moment the behavior looks strange. Don't wait until the behavior becomes visibly concerning. The operators at Chernobyl knew about delayed neutrons and prompt neutrons. They knew that a nuclear reactor walks a line a fraction of a percent wide between life and death. They knew the theory saying that a reactor's apparently human manageable timescale is an artifice, a clever contrivance that hides neutron generation times measured in microseconds. A wise operator treats a device like that with respect. If the device starts behaving in any way odd or unexpected, then it is no longer operating inside the narrow, constrained region where they're assured they understand exactly what's going on, which means that nobody knows what's going on inside there anymore. Who knows whether the clever contrivances will keep working? They can only guess. When a dangerous device starts acting strangely, it's not time to withdraw all but 8 control rods and expect the reactor to keep playing nice. It's time to shut it down. The operators did not treat the reactor with that sort of respect. They knew intellectually that it could explode, but they'd never seen the reactor change that fast. Besides, before 1986, the Soviets did not have a culture conducive to caution around nuclear reactors. They had a system where, if you didn't perform the scheduled safety test, you got fired. In the coming chapters, we'll discuss the lack of safety culture prevailing in AI, which is much worse. Computer security. Computer security is widely understood to be a problem so hard, so cursed, that it cannot be solved, period. You can pay computer security professionals to make software more secure, but all any computer security professional can hope to do is slow down attackers. to make it so that only major intelligence agencies backed by state powers can penetrate your computer security easily. Why? Because a clever attacker can poke at a computer system in ways that the designer never intended or considered, ways that normal use would not turn up in a billion trillion years. An archetypal security hack works as follows. The computer asks for the user's name. The hacker puts in a name that's 280 letters long. The programmer didn't consider that a name would ever be that long. They assumed that names would be 256 letters at most. The leftover 24 letters overflow the storage space that the programmer set aside for the user's name and get written into parts of a computer memory that the programmer assumed the user could never touch. 8 of those letters overwrite the piece of memory that tells the computer which piece of code to run next. Pick the right weird letters, and now the computer is running code it was never supposed to. This can often be parlayed into control of the whole computer system. Buffer overflow attacks, they're called. An attack like that sends a computer system down a weird pathway of cause and effect, an execution path that isn't like the system's normal behavior and that no normal input would hit upon in a billion years. Very literally so, if a programmer tests 280 letter names at random, then almost every possibility will be nonsense and cause the computer to innocently crash. The exact wrong input address that starts running exactly the wrong program that an attacker can use to take control of the system is one out of 18 billion possibilities. It won't show up by accident. Thinking through the intended behavior of the login screen doesn't help you figure out what a smart attacker can do. Testing on random inputs won't show you what a smart attacker can do. An attacker who understands the system better than you do can pluck exactly the wrong answer out of 18 billion possibilities to find the single outcome that gives them the most control. Computer security is a test of an engineer's ability to nail down every single path the computer could take in the face of adversaries who can search all possible ways to perturb the system. It is a famously losing battle, even though the engineers can fully control and craft their own computer's code. We dub the central challenge the curse of edge cases. To be secure, a computer system must work in the face of cases that are outside the normal and expected range, cases that occur on the edges of possibility. Fast processes, narrow margins, feedback loops, complications. These engineering curses can all be overcome. There are space probes that do reach their destination. There are nuclear reactors that don't explode. The curses upon these challenges can be matched and even bested by human ingenuity. The curse of edge case presents another level of difficulty entirely. To have useful computer systems be actually secure is understood by competent professionals in computer security to be beyond human reach. Renowned security professional Bruce Schneier writes in Secrets and Lies, Digital Security in a Network World, modern systems have so many components and connections, some of them not even known by the system's designers, implementers, or users, that insecurities always remain. The lesson for AI here is not merely about superintelligences being able to break into computers, although of course they could. Rather, it's about the general fragility of system constraints in the face of weird edge cases being searched by intelligence. If you hope for AIs to behave less like exploding nuclear reactors, you might try to put in constraints onto the system. Don't get too smart yet. Don't think too fast yet. Always wait for slow human approval. Solve this difficult problem, but without doing anything weird. Those constraints will tend to get in the way of the AI accomplishing one objective or another. And then you're matching your own wits and ability to nail down the edge cases against however much intelligence is flowing through the system to see if your constraint holds up. Space probes, nuclear reactors, computer security. What do all these lessons add up to, and what can we learn from them about the difficulty of aligning an artificial superintelligence? An artificial superintelligence is like a space probe, in that we cannot test it in quite the same environment where it needs to work, and by default it is not retrievable or correctable once it rises high above us. Even if we try a clever contrivance to let us modify it further at that point, the superintelligence would remain high and irretrievable if that contrivance fails. And ASI alignment is even worse than space probes. Failure will destroy not just billions of dollars of investment, but everything. An artificial superintelligence is like a nuclear reactor in that its underlying reality involves immense, potentially self-amplifying forces whose inner processes run faster than humans can react. An artificial superintelligence is like a computer security problem in that every constraint an engineer tries to place upon the system might be bypassed by the intelligent forces those constraints hinder. This collection of challenges would look terrifying even if we understood the laws of intelligence, even if we understood how the heck these AIs worked, even if we knew exactly where the gap between before and after lay, even if we knew exactly how much margin we had for error. We don't know. AI is grown, not crafted. Whatever vast complications lay inside AIs and lend them their powers of intelligence, nobody knows them. Betting that humanity can solve this problem with their current level of understanding seems like betting that alchemists from the year 1100 could build a working nuclear reactor, one that worked in the depths of space, on the first try. We usually try to avoid shouting. It doesn't help to shout most of the time. It just makes people think you're undisciplined. But at some point, after you've calmly gone through all the premises of your argument, we think it becomes unhelpful to downplay, lest people think it's all just a game of calm words. When it comes to AI, the challenge humanity is facing is not surmountable with anything like humanity's current level of knowledge and skill. It isn't close. Attempting to solve a problem like that, with the lives of everyone on Earth at stake, would be an insane and stupid game, or gamble, that nobody should be allowed to try. And that's where I'm going to stop for today. I think I'm losing my voice here. Next time, we will be on Chapter 11, An Alchemy, Not a Science. Y'all have a great day. See you soon.